Um, so maybe I think for this talk, I'll kind of essentially share with you the stuff that we've done that we find are quite interesting, um, and um, and really just talk about some of the learnings around that, and also kind of share how I think about some of the opportunities out there, and how we kind of like where we think where we think the challenges can be. So to start off, I think like there's a lot of folks in here kind of thinking about where can generative AI. Oh, should I unmute myself?
Um,
It says unmute to start speaking.
I think the room is catching it. I can
Okay,
ask them.
then I'll just okay, ignore that. Yeah, so as I was saying, there are a lot of ideas on how to use generative AI. And interesting enough, like we're in that kind of like, I think maybe like 6 months ago, we were in that hype cycle where like everybody thinks AI is going to destroy the world and take over our jobs. And now we're kind of like starting to come down on the hype cycle where people are starting to ask, wait, like it hasn't taken over my job yet. What's going on? Um, so I think the way that I think about it, and that's a good thing, right? All technology goes through that little cycle. I do think that generative AI will come off that cycle much faster because the use cases are all there. But it's just that I think that the market is quite different these days. So maybe, or maybe I'll just kind of present how I think about these things. Um, we think about, so on the diagram here, I think about like if we think about the opportunities on the x-axis, I think about like how complex is the problem that is being tackled? How complex is this AI solution need to be? And then on the y-axis is this solution low risk or high risk, right? Or is there low regulation or high regulation? So something that's simple might be simple relative to how long it takes to implement a solution using generative AI might be, let's say, a chatbot that answers questions on a website, right? Maybe it's customer support and things like that. So that might be relatively simple. In fact, with OpenAI launching these new APIs, it's even become simpler to just attach a data source and get the chatbot to start answering from these data sources. Something that is more complex might be something that requires a lot of product design, figuring out, how do you turn a prompt into a very nice PowerPoint presentation while still giving the user the right controls to 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 be user friendly. I'm still looking for that piece of software. I was telling Chris like, how do I make good slides very quickly? It's still not solved because it's actually a pretty complex problem. If you once you move beyond the cool demo of look at how I can turn a sentence into a slide. Like if you actually like try to use it, you quickly realize like as a user there needs to be more product thinking and development around that. In terms of low risk, high risk, I think like one way to think about it is like, okay, if I deploy the solution, what happens when it goes wrong, right? So low risk might be if the question that's being answered has very little, if it gets it wrong, the user won't be that pissed, or very little legal consequences result. That's low risk. High risk would be things like if you answer a question about banking, finances, right, legal issues, um, these are things that you get it wrong, you might get sued. You get it wrong, somebody might ask for money back. There are certain industries where it's highly regulated. That would be high risk or highly regulated. So I bring this up because if you look at this diagram, first of all, if something is highly regulated and very complex to build, that's a no-go zone. Like it doesn't make sense for anybody to tackle that. So that's easy enough to address. Then you go to the flip side, right? Something that's relatively simple, relatively low risk. Um, the problem there is there are existing solutions. Right? Not everything needs to be AI. Not everything needs to be smart. There are dumb chatbots out there that are answering questions today. Even if they only get 80% of their solutions right, that's good enough for most businesses. Right? These non-AI solutions that are dumb but 80% effective, they charge like $10 a month. These businesses are not looking around for something more sophisticated. They claim they are. They will say, "Oh, I want the latest AI." Then the moment you tell them, "We're going to charge you like $100 a month," and they're like, "Oh, no, thanks," right? Because the dumb solutions work well enough. And the other dumb solutions, I'm not saying OpenAI is dumb. I'm just talking about some problem sets that are relatively simple and low risk, OpenAI is going to tackle a lot of it. And we saw with the latest launch, um, they spin up a new API. The joke is like 5,000 startups die, right? Because a lot of these things, the moment OpenAI sees that a certain abstraction is possible, they will launch it. They're not afraid to be aggressive, and so a lot of simple, low risk stuff, I think, is going to be directly competitive with OpenAI. The stuff that's relatively simple, but is highly regulated or has a lot of high risks, that stuff will probably get solved at large enterprises internally, or they're waiting for regulation changes, right? So I was talking to somebody in the wealth tech space, and you can imagine an AI chatbot doing a lot of basic personal finance recommendations, just telling you very basic things about how you should think about risk, where you should not where you should invest, but how you should think about investing. Well, it turns out that's highly regulated. You cannot give wealth advice without a license as an individual. So unless those regulations change, it's highly unlikely that you'll see AI providing these solutions. Um, so on the top left, oh, yeah, was that a question? Yeah.
I, I've actually talked to a bunch of financial advisor friends,
Hmm.
and one insight I got related to wealth tech is that it's still a very relationship based type of industry. So rather than providing a chatbot that can service the users, it's like a chatbot or a tool that can help them know more about their users. Are you seeing any advances in that area, or is that still because of the regulation is like a hard?
I think any tool that is customer facing almost like immediately pushes you that high risk, high regulation bar. Anything that you can build to that serves more like a co-pilot, that serves more like an internal tool, kind of drives you down that low risk axis. So anything that's internal facing is definitely, I think, the use cases will get deployed faster. Um,
Is that
and yeah,
still mostly internal you see, or do you see there being external opportunities to come in and help the banks?
I think the internal solutions, the use cases are much easier to sell and much easier to get buy-in. The moment, even if we're not talking about banking, even if you think about like something maybe slightly less regulated, even if like e-commerce, right? If the AI solution says something that can cause significant confusion on the consumer's part, or it can cause a lot of brand image damaging, I think people are quite reluctant to deploy something like this. But like you said, if you're able to um, assist the customer support team, right, for them to be more productive, for them to still validate the answers before it gets sent out, that lowers the risk significantly. And I think most generative AI solutions is going to be more along that route. That could change fairly quickly though. Like I think it starts internal as a co-pilot, as like a co-pilot, and then if the numbers, if people can see that in a data-driven way that these co-pilots are answering most of the questions without human intervention anyways, maybe that will flip the script in a year or two, and businesses will start trusting these solutions more. But yeah.
Are they developing in-house themselves though, or is there opportunities for like service providers to provide solutions that can enable it?
I think that depends on the business. Large banks basically they tend to have internal teams uh, who will who try to tackle these things first. So medium-sized businesses are probably much easier to tackle. That said, I also feel like this technology is transformative enough that um, eventually the large corporations will recognize that their internal teams can't get it done. This is not an attack on their teams. It's just, the technology is new enough. There are enough use cases that internal teams can. I highly doubt that internal teams can handle all the use cases, and I think that's where external vendors come in. So that's how we think about the opportunities. Things for startups, for external vendors, the use cases needs to be a little bit more complex. At the same time, it cannot be too high risk. But the fact that it needs to be a little bit more complex means it takes a little bit more time to develop. And I think that's the main reason why we're not seeing a ton of deployed solution in the market right now. I don't think it's a lack of I don't think it's like a, I don't think it's a I don't think it's not that the technology doesn't work. It's really just a matter of time. So host disable participant from screen sharing. Uh, Anything you can help me do there?
If you are the host.
Oh, right. Let's try that again.
Yeah.
I am the host now. So I will talk about two main things. I'll start with some use cases in the insurance space because that's where we've been focusing a bit more on. And I'll come back to talk about some of the stuff we have done in the education space as well, or the coaching space. So I know folks here doesn't seem like there's a huge insurance background, so that's okay. So I'll try to feel free to ask questions if there's something here that doesn't make sense. Let's see. So our firm, we landed a contract basically 2 months ago in the health insurance space with a health insurance company. And a lot of what we do currently involves processing the hospital invoices that they get from the hospitals. This is just so from a consumer perspective, if you have health insurance, when you go to a hospital today, you get something done, maybe you stay at the hospital for 5 days, the hospital, if they have a relationship with the health insurer, will just send the bill directly to the insurer. And the insurer needs to figure out what to do with that bill, right? They need to categorize the expenses and figure out how much they should actually be paying back to the hospital. Turns out, despite how it's funny, like mainstream media will talk about insurance companies like they have all the data in the world and that like they can predict when you die. But the reality is like insurance companies are one of the least digitized companies I've ever seen. I used to think it's because they're incompetent, but once you dive deeper into the problem, you realize it's an industry full of unstructured, non-standardized text. And it is not that they don't understand the idea of standardization. It's more a matter of you cannot standardize. Like it is not feasible. Right? So if you think about from a hospital perspective, there are probably well over 10,000 hospitals in all of Asia. If you add in all the little clinics, all the little doctors, well over 50,000 or 100,000. If you want to sit everyone down and tell them, from now on, all your invoices must be in a certain format, and all the things that you charge for must be in a certain format, it's never going to happen. Right? It's never going to happen. So from an insurer's perspective, they've always had to process these bills manually. So one thing that large language models is especially good at is with text. And not only is it good with text, but it has a knowledge base that traditional software simply doesn't have. Right. So if we look, for example, so this on the right is I know it's a little bit small, but on the right, maybe I'll try to go full screen here. Does this do it? Not really. Oh, I just made it worse. Okay, so on the right here, we have a kind of a type of hospital bill that talks about what has been done to the patient. And yes, OCR has been around for a long time, but you can extract these things and you can extract the text, but if you're not able to analyze it, the text isn't very useful. Right? So, for example, when you submit a claim in health today, the insurer will ask you like, hey, was this like, did you go to a hospital? Was this inpatient, outpatient? Was this medicine? Just that simple act of categorizing, you may not think much about it because it's such a simple task. But from a software perspective, That was not possible just a year ago. Maybe it was possible if you like invest a lot of money to develop a knowledge base around what what is parenteral nutrition mean? Right? Like maybe if you decide to invest a lot of money into building a knowledge base, you might have gotten something out of it, but I highly doubt the ROI was worth it. But now you plug that into any large language models, and it tells you exactly what that is. You can ask the LLM to categorize it. Is this inpatient, outpatient? You can even ask LLM to start guessing what the patient, what's the condition here, right? Do they have diabetes, right? Did they go through a major surgery? You can start doing all this analysis without a lot of work from the software side. But the most basic use case that we help them do is just extract these line items and categorize them into inpatient, outpatient medicine. And that already helps them automate a major part of their process that was traditionally done very manually by people who needed the language skills to even process these documents. When we started kind of working with them, we soon realized that it goes beyond that. So hospital invoices actually go into much finer details about what's been charged. So they'll go, if you take a hospital invoice, it'll talk about exactly how much painkiller was administered, right? How many syringes was used, all these things. They actually itemize everything. Traditionally, insurers just throw that data away. It's way too much data. You're not gonna get a human, even if you go like very low cost labor, they're not gonna be able to process that data effectively. But now with generative AI, you can start taking these medicine name, you can start taking these operations and start categorizing them into something that's queryable, right? It's morphine 10 mg, so it's probably a pain medication. It's probably it's an operation related to a surgery. Things like that, LLMs can do quite well. And the result is that the insurers can now step back and say, how much did we spend on pain medication in the last quarter? Right? Is it trending up? Is it getting out of control? Is one hospital charging a lot more for medication than another one? Is a certain type of doctor going insane, charging an exorbitant amount for a certain type of operations compared to other doctors? These are things that insurance companies care about, because if they can understand where their money is going, then they can start negotiating, eliminate fraud, negotiate the price down, and change the product, change the coverage to, and change the underlying writing model to prioritize certain expenses. Yeah, go ahead.
Can you tell me a bit about the kind of model you're using?
The what kind?
Can you tell me a bit about your LLM?
Yeah.
Are you using 3.5, 4? Are you using 6 open llama?
We use 4. We use OpenAI's ChatGPT 4. I think we can get pretty good results with 3 as well if it's just categorization. Surprisingly, so like a lot of devils in the details. So like when I'll give some like example of like things that seem surprisingly simple, but turns out it's not. So for example, when we were told about this problem of like managing these invoices, the way it was described was like, oh, just look at the line item and you'll know whether it's inpatient or outpatient, and you'll know how to categorize. And so we start looking into it. We start processing and trying different things. And then soon enough, you want to edge cases very quickly. Like you start asking them like, wait, if I get a hospital invoice, how do I know, let's say it says X-ray. How do I know if X-ray was done as an inpatient or outpatient? And when you ask these insurers, then they go, good question. Right? And then they start like asking the operations teams, like, how do you actually? And they're like, oh, you gotta like read the whole document. Did they ever mention inpatient anywhere in the document, in the invoice? Is there a mention of like a bed that was charged? Is there a mention of admission date and outpatient date? So like to them it's like common sense, right? It's like any junior employee, even somebody who has like basic English skills, can read an invoice and guess whether somebody went to a hospital. But traditional software, like good luck trying to code that up. Right? And even with and that's where I mentioned like GPT 3 and 4. 3 is probably capable of, say, doing some basic categorization. 4 is able to analyze and answer questions much more holistically. Right? It's able to read, if you give it out a text and an invoice, it's able to tell you things like, yeah, it looks like this patient spent some time in the hospital. Right? It's able to look at the admission day. This seems like it's an inpatient type of expense. So some of these things, occasionally, yeah, for a human, it's like basic reading skills is is always expected. Now, I think for the first time, we have relatively uh, manageable costs on having computers do these basic analysis on documents.
So for 4, are you, so can I ask how are you getting around their token limit? So it's what, only 8K tokens per minute, right?
Yeah,
And that means a single page basically like that will be 8K.
yeah.
And it takes about a minute to process.
Yeah.
So I take it all of your load is basically offline load. It's not
Um,
real time processing. No one is asking you for it.
I think for the type of documents they're processing, they don't need it to be like, it depends on the UI flow, so we work with them to figure that out as well. But you're right that processing time is an issue as well. If, at least what we're doing is not, it doesn't need to be like 10-second, it can wait a little bit.
Yeah.
The token limit is a limitation it sounds like, I think you mentioned earlier you're working in
Yeah, we
compliance.
are a bit ahead of you. We already went through this on our side.
Yeah.
That's why I'm wondering whether you learned something that I haven't.
Yeah. So invoices are actually relatively short. You don't need to process, like there can be a 10-page invoice, but you don't need to like stuff everything in into the context window. Um, but one thing is GPT-4 recently enlarged the context window to 128K. That's that's a good size for a lot of documents. Um, we have seen there are other use cases where like the documents are longer. We have experimented with working in, say, the mortgage policy type of solution, where you try to answer questions about whether somebody is eligible for a bank mortgage. Those policy documents tend to be 70, 80 pages long. And if you miss one or two things inside the document, it can be the difference between whether somebody qualifies or doesn't qualify. Those use cases are trickier and much more costly as well.
Maybe we can connect offline.
Yeah, happy to. Yeah.
You mentioned a 95% plus accuracy.
Mm-mm.
Have you found what are the scenarios that make it inaccurate? Like,
Yeah.
What are the main things?
Handwriting, especially in health. Even it's not actually not a problem. We just tell the insurers like, I'm pretty sure even your operations team cannot read this, so why would you expect us to read it? So there's that. There's also just again back to the problem of like, a lot of this manual operations, they are not like they are a lot of the times there are a lot of edge cases that even the insurers haven't thought through. A lot like the joke is I was talking to another company in the insurance space, and he was like, yeah, like he worked with that company where half the time their operations team just categorize all their expenses as miscellaneous. So like, are you like in that case, are we accurate, right? We actually like so there's these a lot of these edge cases where the existing operations aren't black and white in terms of what is correct and what's not correct. And then for us, that's also like not accurate either. Yeah, so I would say like and then finally like maybe the part that's really not accurate is there are going to be cases where if the document, the way the tables are set up is maybe very, very complex, then the combination of OCR and AI is still not able to quite get to the right answer.
Have, have you thought through the process of quickly identifying these edge cases or the ones that potentially are inaccurate? Because you're making it more efficient to get to
Yeah.
an answer, but you don't know if that answer is right or not. And so
Yeah.
the user would have to go through all of them to confirm.
Yeah.
Versus, is there a way to identify the ones that we think are like on the edge where?
Yeah, it's on our roadmap. It's not something we've done like right now, but in our kind of like to us, the thinking would be that, like you mentioned, um, visual analysis is highly available now, especially with GPT-4. So you can identify things like, hey, is this like a document that has a lot of handwriting, right? Just like flag it and tell them like, look, we're not going to do this. And you can like flag documents that are just not what the expected documents and use cases are. So all this stuff I think is possible, but it does take time to work with the kind of companies to figure out what is the right workflow. Um, and that is like the other thing, I mentioned OpenAI and kind of like being very aggressive. A lot of use cases. I think a lot of things that take time to develop is working with clients and businesses to figure out what is the right product design and what is the right workflow. Because ultimately, no system will be 100% accurate. So it's figuring out like what are the edge cases where it's not accurate, what is the backup plan in those scenarios and whatnot.
Do you know the accuracy of when humans are doing it?
No, because they don't keep track of these things. Like most manual operations today, like at least in the insurance industry, they're happy that it gets done.
Yeah.
Like they have a huge backlog, right? And they're just happy it gets done, and they're constantly they're actually trying to simplify a lot of their claims processing flow and cutting out the work so that they can respond faster, because they know that if they can respond faster, clients are happier, and they'll get less complaints. On the other hand, if they cut out some of the work, then they'll get less data, and they'll get less insights. So where a lot of AI, I think, like the opportunity is in saying like, hey, you don't have to compromise, right? You can be faster and process more data and get more insights, right? So that's where I think a lot of a lot of kind of the opportunities is around like, how do you take existing data people have and turn it into structured data that they can then pass on into other predictive models, or even just helping their internal systems talk to each other through some structured data. That's I think in a lot of larger companies and enterprises, that's already a huge win. So I already mentioned that, just digitizing expenses, customizing, profiling expenses, helping people understand expenses is a huge gain for the insurers. It's probably not just insurance. I have heard offhand that I've heard at least 2 startups that have been around for several years that don't even use generative AI, where literally all they do is help larger companies understand where their money is going. That is a general problem that large enterprises have. I think where generative AI comes in is you can do this 10x better, right? Or you can tackle expenses that were very challenging to understand before, like health. So that's something that we're tackling now, but we expect different use cases. So profiling customers is another thing, right? So I think you mentioned earlier, is there opportunity to kind of help agents understand their customers? To give a bit of kind of insights, right? Like, if you call up your insurer today, or you maybe call up an insurance agent today, right? And you ask a simple question. You ask them, did you know that I have diabetes? They wouldn't know. They would be like, give me a second. Right? They would like have to sort through all the claims documents. Even like that's assuming they have access to it in front of them, right? That's assuming they're efficient. They open up their system. Oh, right. It seems like you like did some surgery related to that like a few years ago. But then they might understand you as a customer. And you can imagine a larger company. The data is much more fragmented, and the workers and the agents are typically much more narrow-minded in what they have to do. So even just basic ideas of taking existing documents and summarizing what the customer is about, right? Do they have a certain condition? Which products did they buy? When did they buy it? Why did they buy it? All these things can help agents become more effective. and help customer support become more effective. Yeah, go ahead.
Have you seen from your experience, what's the threshold amount of data that you need to be able to provide pretty robust recommendations that are?
It really depends on the use case. Because, okay, so for example, insurance companies, one thing we tried was they threw a lot of medical data. They said like, hey, we have these new clients. Here's like a bunch of documents resembling their medical history. Can you just quickly summarize it? Because they need it for some operations on intaking these customers. And yeah, the summaries don't need to be 100% accurate, but as long as they're able to pinpoint, the major issues and diseases this customer has, that already saves them the time of reading through 20 medical reports with all these medical terms that their team probably doesn't even understand. So do you need that much data? Probably not. Like a lot of these things, even just a quick summarization can very effectively help existing operations, but it depends what that operation is. In this case, they were taking in new customers. We're not prioritizing that project with them, but what we're trying to help them do is we want to help them understand which customers cost them the most. Is it the ones that have done knee surgeries? Is it the ones that have diabetes, right? Where are their costs? Where are the customers that are outliers? That's something that they need to understand. Some of us might think that insurers already have this data. They don't. Actuaries, a lot of their job is to guess, right? So a lot of the actuaries' job is they think, what are the top 10 diseases? Okay, cardiac arrest. Let's focus on cardiac arrest. How much do we think it costs us per year? And then they'll sample some data and they'll say, okay, here's my estimate. I'll add a 20% margin for buffer, right? And that's my estimation on how much our company will spend on cardiac arrest this year. When actually they have all the data, like they can in theory, if you come from a data-driven company, it's like, why don't you just look exactly on how much you spent last year on cardiac related expenses? And the quick answer is, hey, we have all this data, but it's unstructured. We can't query that. We are able to sample it, get an actuary to read through some of it, but that's the best that they can do right now. So that's some of the opportunities in this space. But it generalizes to other spaces, right? So if you think about sales, right? If you have, regardless of whether it's health insurance, right? You can think about other, whether it's wealth tech or some other spaces where if you actually understand your customers better in terms of what their background is, in terms of what kind of products they've already bought, right? You can use that data and figure out when's a good time to cross-sell them, upsell them. Whether that's through, and there's two ways to think about it, right? If there are existing agent forces, then you already have a team of agents. Then you can use AI to summarize each client, flag the ones that sound like there's a lot of opportunities for upsell and cross-sell, and ping your agents to prioritize those and tell them hey, this person bought these products with us. They recently went through these operations. Time to go and talk to them, understand them, and potentially cross-sell certain things. If the business has nothing to do, it's not an agent-based business, you can use generative AI to create newsletters. Sorry, not newsletters, but create personalized emails where you say okay, we know that this is your background. We know here's some new products that are potentially a good match. Generate those emails and start automating some of these marketing and sales channels. So we see that as a potential use case in insurance, but we're pretty sure those things apply across other industries as well. From a customer support perspective, I think we went over a little bit of this already, but I think a lot of customer support is the very obvious use case, right? Everyone's like customer support, automate customer support. The problem, like I mentioned earlier, is the simple use cases. A lot of it is already covered by the simple chatbots, essentially the rule-driven chatbots. They may not be smart. They might frustrate you 20% of the time, but they're cheap and they're effective 80% of the time. So you kind of have to find the use cases where they're not effective enough. Like insurance is one where no rule-based chatbot will ever work. There's too many scenarios. If I ask a rule-based chatbot, hey, will my insurance cover nose jobs? There's no way unless there's some army of people who like created this giant tree of decision that was like, if somebody asked about nose jobs, say no. like unless that was the case, it's highly unlikely that a rule-based engine would be able to answer that question effectively. On the other hand, insurance companies are also not that thrilled about the idea of letting generative AI answer these questions directly because it's early stage, they don't trust the answers. If one thing goes wrong, if they say that an operation that costs 100K is covered and turns out it should not be covered, that's 100K loss for the insurance company. So, so far, our direction there is you have to work with the customer support team. You have to build something that's more of a co-pilot and then slowly deploy that and show the numbers that prove that it's effective, that it's consistent, and that it won't cause problem for the insurance company. And even then, there might be some regulation hurdles. So I'm sure there are many use cases of customer support but it has to be kind of like not so simple, but not so complicated and high risk that it's regulated. And you gotta have to find that sweet spot. And those sweet spots exist. We haven't really touched on anything that hits those sweet spots.
Yeah. Copilot and customer support, especially last years in InsurTech.
Yeah.
And we tried to build a similar POC for one of the big insurers, basically talk to my policy.
Yeah.
One-to-one example, like, can I do this kind of treatment? And the same response from a customer, like, yes, guys, it's very good, it works, but who will check that the bot tells the truth? So basically, we've been pushed to remove hallucinations, which is impossible.
Exactly. So same, very similar learning. Yeah. So that's the kind of rough summary on the insurance front. Any questions so far? If not, I will head to another. I think I've entered a weird UI state where I can't. Wait, is it showing? No.
Drinks break. Anyone refill?
Thank you. Is there someone you can kick me out and like let me get back in? I'm like missing the button that says stop sharing.
Yeah, that's almost done.
It's like a Windows Zoom app, or maybe I just kick myself. Oh. Hold that.
Can you give me the full spread?
I'm sure I can.
How does it matter anyway?
Okay, I might actually know what's the issue.
ChatGPT.
All right, technical issues. All right, I'll try to kick myself out and jump back in. Nope, that's not working either. All right, I'm a little stuck.
So the next session will be on Tuesday next week, Tanjung Pagar. Now, put the URL here in RSVP directly. Again, it's going to be key.ai / Xoogler AI Meetup. So feel free to RSVP. And this time, can you give us one more spiel of what you'll be talking about?
So it's going to be about this new product that we launched on Product Hunt called Videofy. It's another Xoogler startup that I've been helping, and it's based on generative AI, but it's a text to video. So it allows you to convert articles and text and blogs into videos automatically using a combination of different generative AI models that we've used in the pipeline. So it's a very interesting product that had a lot of learnings. We wanted to share that with the community.
Can you make me the host again?
Yep. You need to do a presentation or do a walkthrough or
Both, we can do a live demo as well as a presentation. I think presentation would mostly focus on product and product design perspective. I think one of the things that is not often spoken about is something that I realized as working as, like the product person building a generative AI product, right, is that the design of the product is impacted by the fact that it's a generative AI product. There are many, like what that said, like, there is, the way software gets designed now itself is fundamentally changing, especially workflow software, content creation flow now is based on a combination of both the user inputting and as well as what the system is recommending from the generative AI. So there's a lot of design patterns there that are coming up, which are very interesting and new. So I want to share some of that as well. And some of the latest in terms of what are the other kind of models that we're looking at. That could be text to speech and voice cloning and lip sync and dubbing, and there's some very advanced models that are coming out. Other than obviously talking about LLMs, I'll probably not talk so much about LLMs because I think both you covered LLMs and last week, a couple of weeks ago, sorry, SK covered more about image generation. So probably what I'll be covering what is more about the other kind of models that are there as well in the generative AI space.
With the way that things have trended in the Gen AI space, where OpenAI and Google can quickly iterate their product to cover a lot of use cases that maybe early startups were able to do. How do you think about it as you create your own product, or you think about that where you can have a IP that you can actually maintain as OpenAI starts to do more and more?
This is a question that a lot of investors will ask you. Look, in my personal opinion on this is that the tech mode, the IP mode, the data mode that a lot of startups claimed before the AI startups, because I've been working since I left Google for a decade now, I've been working in AI startups. And nobody in their right mind can now honestly tell you that I have an IP mode or a data mode in this modern generative AI world. Not because of the big tech players, but because of the open source movement that's happening. And that's the real thing, right? So you're building your own proprietary model to do one custom, say legal AI tech, for example. It's going to be open source community that's going to outdo you on that. A medical model, and I think Google has a huge medical model, but it's not open source. I think it's still proprietary. Forgot the name of that one. Which one? Anybody recollects the name of the Google's medical model?
Barely worked on it?
No, yeah, they released it.
You tell us it's Tuesday.
Yeah, I'll find out. I find out because one of the Googlers who works on the healthcare space in Google, right? So, okay, anyway, coming back to the point that you were asking about. So there is no such thing. I think for a startup, the real defensibility is going very deep vertical, like what Gilbert's doing in the insurance space, for example. To me, if I were to build a startup based on generative AI, is that take an existing workflow, it's poorly digitized, it's poorly automated, and just disrupt the industry by just building a new tool that's based on this and that's verticalized. So vertical solution is one thing. And to look at verticalization, you can look at vertical in two ways, in my view. One way of looking at verticals is industry verticals. But within industry, there are different functions, right? So in insurance, there is claims processing, and there's customer support. There's marketing and sales enablement. So we're seeing a lot of startups come across that marketing and sales enablement, like a bunch of startups which you guys are doing automated scheduling for home services. You see, that's a pretty good specific niche. I'm not saying I'm not saying a home services company cannot take and assemble generative AI to create that. They can, but it's a build versus buy decision from an enterprise user's perspective, right? The second thing is that I think if you're saying sales enablement as a function, right, and then they say, hey, I have to basically connect the dots, it becomes equally a data integration and synchronization play, orchestration play, as much as it is about the generative AI play, right? So you have the opportunity to disrupt, and there's this, I follow Thomas Tungus Redpoint Ventures newsletter. It's very, very insightful. And he talks about how this advent of generative AI is going to help a lot of very traditional industries jump the SaaS curve entirely. They've not been SaaSified, they've not been digitized, but they're going to jump the SaaS curve entirely and go into software using this. It's a very interesting theory. What they're saying is, let's say in the construction industry or insurance industry, where so much work is done on paper, and they could not justify the ROI of creating a SaaS tool that digitizes it, right? Before. Now, maybe it does. So that leap of ROI is there for them. So the scales are now more, makes sense. Makes sense for me to digitize this. Makes sense for me to ask questions on this, for at least the internal team with the low risk. And I think there the opportunities are never startups compared to the big tech players, because unless the Google Cloud team comes with an industry-specific solution architecture, which AWS does pretty well, but it's still a lot of effort for somebody to go and build that. And they're never going to be that vertical anyway, right? I mean, we've all worked at Google before. We know how industry specialized we are, but the products are still horizontal at the end of the day, right? But if you're in, like SK would say, right? Again, he told me last week, a couple of weeks ago, here's the space of content generation. I'm a generative fill AI, background removal, or like some sort of text to this thing and all of that, then you are definitely in a very precarious position, because Adobe's generative fill is there. Canvas just launched a bunch of tools. So there it's very difficult. That kind of horizontal play is a very risky place to be in. But to answer that question, Videofy, and I will talk about it next week, is we are going very deep into the publisher industry, basically. Right? So the co-founders came from the publishing partnership background. So going deep vertical and then creating lots of videos for them is potentially a verticalized mode that they can move.
But don't you think that basic SaaS is dead? I think
SaaS as we know it.
Basic SaaS, like if you're building a widget, a basic service, I think that is dead as a business model. I don't think that's going to survive.
No,
I think that if you can acquire a customer base like fast, so you're deeply in their you're deeply in their database, you're good. Right? Very hard to get out once you're in. But if you're not in, very hard to be a widget anymore. That says, oh, I'm going to plug into this. No, I don't think that works anymore.
So, do people have hard stops at 1:30 that they need to leave? You need to leave.
Yeah.
Maybe Gilbert, you can finish in 5 minutes and then they can leave.
Ooh.
Stick around.
Okay, I'll
Sorry.
No, that's okay. I almost agree like 90% of what you're saying. I'll
What
try
are
to.
10% you disagree?
Everything you said except for is and the.
Precise way of agreeing. Go on.
So yeah, I'll take 5 minutes to talk about some of the other stuff that we've tried. Very different things. This is basically before we started focusing on insurance, we were doing more consumer-facing things. So we worked with some coaches, worked with some book authors to try to explore what happened, like what is the future of education, right? What is the future of coaching? And in short, the high level problem is like, if you look at educators, you look at coaches, typically they're one-on-one coaches or they write books. And both sides have problems. One is either not scalable or the other one is just like really boring. I don't, no offense to people who read books. I love books, but you want to find a teenager that can spend a month reading a book today, good luck. It's not going to happen, right? So, I think where the education space can use generative AI is creating stuff that's bite-sized, personalized, and interactive. We essentially had two value propositions for people who book authors, nonfiction book authors. The first user proposition we gave them was, hey, why don't you have a chatbot where people can ask questions about your content and you can get answers back. Essentially a chat interface for your books. Now that is a very useful thing to have. Most people understand it, and we think we're going to see more and more of these solutions, especially with the new APIs that OpenAI launched. Now, the problem with just something like this is that one, it's just a feature, it's not a product. And two, so the other problem with just launching a chatbot for something, I don't, it doesn't, from a consumer perspective, is that, you know, it takes a lot of work for a consumer to ask good questions. Like unless they're like trying to get something done, most people don't know what questions to ask in order to learn effectively. If I'm trying to learn, for example, how to be a great digital marketer, what questions am I supposed to ask? Like, it's not where do I start? That's where education needs to be more push driven instead of pull. And so I think that's where kind of like the first user proposition here kind of stops and is not good enough for the average consumer. And then what we did next was we said, okay, well, can we use generative AI to help people ask the right questions? So what you're seeing on the right is essentially we created a course based on a curriculum of leadership training. And sorry, when we say we created, I really mean AI generated a lot of these things. And so these are like kind of the idea is that you would start by choosing a part of the curriculum, in this case, leading as a new manager. And then from there on, you'll get a dynamic walkthrough of the content underneath what it takes to lead a new manager. So at the start of the module, you'll get a bunch of learning objectives denoted by the stars there. And from there on, as a user, you'll get bite-sized information. Leadership, blah, blah, blah. People often think it's synonymous with dictatorship, but it's not the case. This kind of bite-sized information. And then after that, AI generates questions to help you navigate through the chapter. And these questions either help you go deeper into a subject, or they help you navigate to the next learning objective. So if you are interested to learn more about what it means to be an empathetic leader, you can just click of a button and dive deeper into that. If you're not that interested in empathetic leadership, you can tap on the other options to move along in the chapter. The idea is that people should be learning based on the things that they actually care about, not based on what the book author thinks should fill up the pages. And of course, the content that comes back will still be prioritizing the content in the book. And in addition to that, people can ask whatever question they want. They don't necessarily have to press the button. They can ask whatever question they have in mind as well. So the stage of this product is a little bit in between right now. We can get the concept makes sense to coaches and book authors, to the ones that we're successfully reach out to. Whether people are willing to pay for this is up in the air. We do have existing partners who are getting people to pay, but whether this is like the type of business that can get, a lot of the population to pay, or just a bunch of niche, hardcore learners, that's up for debate. Personally, from my perspective, I have to give you a sense of the experience. It's very transformative when you can start learning only about the things that you care about and in the ways that you care about, and stop spending a ton of time reading through an entire book. And in fact, when I took on the when our team took on the insurance gig, one of the first things I did was I told the team, like, can we create a dynamic curriculum with this chatbot about insurance, so I can quickly get up to speed and speak the right lingo. And that's exactly what we did. That's exactly how I learned a lot of the different types of insurances and what's in the market. From a personal attestation perspective, this is where learning is going. Personalized mentorship, stuff that is dynamic, bite-sized, and to the point. But from how do you go to market with that effectively, there's a bunch of hurdles. Happy to chat more about it after this. But yeah, thanks for listening, and thanks for participating today.
Thanks everyone. Thank you, Gilbert, for doing this presentation. I know you've been busy with